Naomi Long.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will have been deeply saddened by the passing of Lord Molyneux of Killeed. James Molyneux was a distinguished Second World War veteran and a fine parliamentarian, serving Northern Ireland with great distinction for more than 4 decades, both in this House and the other place. Mr. Speaker, we are committed to ensuring the maximum level of transparency in relation to party funding in Northern Ireland that the prevailing security situation allows. Progress has been made in detailed discussions with the Electoral Commission on finalising the new arrangements. I have spoken with the Electoral Commissioner and I am confident that the draft legislation necessary will be ready to lay early in the next Parliament.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would wish to add the condolences of myself and my party to those which were expressed by the Minister, to the family, to the friends and to the former colleagues of Lord Molyneux. Could I ask the Minister, given that an undertaking was given here during the passage of the bill, that in October of last year the security situation would again be reviewed with a view to lifting the secrecy which pertains to party political donations? What progress specifically has been made in that regard?
Minister. Well, I'm grateful to the honourable lady for her question. She's quite right in the miscellaneous provision bill. It was discussed around the security situation and reviewing it and amending this particular measure accordingly. It is our aspiration that we shall have full transparency in Northern Ireland as we do in Great Britain. Our judgment at the moment is the security situation does not warrant that and that we cannot take that risk, but we will keep the matter under constant review.
Mr. Edward
Mr. Speaker, whilst looking at the transparency of donations to political parties, will my honourable friend check out with the National Crime Agency and, of course, the Chief Constable that when they're looking at organised crime down in the border area, particularly South Armagh, things such as fuel laundering, that they look very carefully at the destination of all the funds made from this organised crime, given that the people that are taking part in the crime...
The honourable gentleman should resume his seat. I was very indulgent towards the honourable gentleman, not taking account of the fact that he has question 8. The substance of his question just now has got absolutely nothing to do with question 1. Mr. Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I take this opportunity to pay a tribute to my predecessor, the Lord Molyneux of Killeed, KBE, who served in this House as the member for South Antrim from 1970 until 1993, or 1983, and then from 83 to 97 as the member for the new constituency of Lagan Valley. He is fondly remembered by my constituents. He was the consummate parliamentarian. He provided strong leadership in very dark days in Northern Ireland. He will be fondly remembered and missed by many, and our thoughts and prayers are with his family. Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State and the Minister will be aware that Sinn Féin raise millions of pounds by various means each year for their electoral campaigns. There is a clear disparity in political party funding in Northern Ireland, and yet Sinn Féin continue to draw hundreds of thousands of pounds in allowances from this House, despite not taking their seats. When are the government going to address this disparity?
Minister.
Well, the right honourable gentleman will know that that is a matter for the House and not for me. And this matter was determined last in 2006, and I would not wish to trespass further on what is the prerogative of the House.
Mr. William Bain.
Number 2, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 2 and 3 together. An annual progress report on the Economic Pact was published in July. The range of items so far delivered include improvements on business access to finance, funding projects secured from the Green Investment Bank, continuation of 100% assisted area status for Northern Ireland, and a record year for inward investment following the G8 and follow-up investment conference.
William Bain.
I'm grateful, but with 1 in 6 people in Northern Ireland on low pay and intergenerational poverty remaining stubbornly high, shouldn't this government be getting a move on to raise the minimum wage to at least £8 an hour and get as many people onto the living wage as possible, so that this is a recovery in living standards for all the people in Northern Ireland.
Well, he'll be aware that my honourable friend the Chancellor has said that he would like to see increases in the minimum wage, and also we are cutting taxes for those on the lowest incomes. We've cut taxes for 670,000 people in Northern Ireland, and those on the minimum wage have had their income tax bill halved. We've also seen unemployment in Northern Ireland fall for the 25th consecutive month by 1,700, giving many more people the security of a pay packet and the reassurance that involves.
This is Mary Glindon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Will the Minister meet with the Northern Ireland union leaders, as I did recently, so she can understand the frustrations of squeezed teachers, bus drivers and health workers and praise their vital work rather than condemn them for being forced to vote for industrial action?
Secretary of State.
Well, I have met trade union groups on various occasions, including in Northern Ireland, and of course I am hugely supportive of the work done by our public servants and our frontline workers. It is important, of course, that the whole public sector takes part in the austerity programme, and the government is doing everything we can to put our public finances right to ensure that we can continue to provide the best possible public services for the country.
Mr Nigel Mills.
What impact does she think another round of stalemate at Stormont will have on measures to attract investment and encourage growth in Northern Ireland?
Secretary of State.
Well, there's no doubt that the announcement by Sinn Féin on Monday was a significant setback for the Stormont House Agreement, but it's inevitable that there are bumps in the road with agreements of this nature. That has been the case in the past. I'll be working very hard to get things back on track and help the parties get this matter resolved. Political stability is, of course, crucial when it comes to attracting inward investment, and that's one of the many reasons why we need to press ahead with implementing the Stormont House Agreement.
Fiona Bruce.
Thank you. Number 4, Mr Speaker.
No, I don't wish to be unkind to the Honourable Lady. We're on question 2, which has been grouped with question 3. We will come to the Honourable Lady. Mr Nigel Dodds.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Secretary of State accept that people in Northern Ireland, those who observe the Northern Ireland political scene, are stunned and bewildered and indeed angry at what Sinn Féin have done in reneging on their agreement on welfare reform without any good reason whatsoever? Does the Secretary of State wish to spell out now at the dispatch box the implications in terms of corporation tax and other implications of the Stormont House Agreement not proceeding? Because it's very, very clear that Sinn Féin are putting their own narrow self-party interest ahead of vulnerable people and the entire community in Northern Ireland.
Well, this is, as I've said, a serious setback. I believe that the change of mind by Sinn Féin is unhelpful and hugely disappointing. But as I've said, the task now is for the Northern Ireland Executive Parties to work to continue with efforts to implement the Stormont House Agreement, and I hope to get the party leaders together as soon as possible to discuss how we resolve this welfare question. But the Stormont House Agreement will not be reopened. We do need to press ahead with implementation. The corporation tax question is difficult. It is expressly linked with resolution of welfare reform. The bill contains a commencement clause, and there is no question that this welfare question must be resolved. The Executive must fulfil its obligations under the Stormont House Agreement before the commencement clause could be operated. But in the interim, the Government is proposing to continue with the legislation to complete its parliamentary progress, because we are determined to implement the agreement fully and fairly. But let me be very clear, Northern Ireland will not get these devolved powers until the Stormont House Agreement is implemented.
Mr Speaker, I think that in terms of Northern Ireland, it's very, very important now that people in Northern Ireland, and indeed this House and everybody looking at the political scene, is very, very clear the responsibility for the current crisis lies squarely with Sinn Féin, who are reneging on their commitments clearly made and openly expressed in the Stormont House Agreement. So will the Secretary of State be very, very clear that she won't take this blanket condemnation approach or blanket blame approach, but she will focus on the problem, Sinn Féin?
Secretary of State.
I will indeed focus on the problem, and he's right that this current setback is the result of the actions of Sinn Féin, which, as I've said, are hugely disappointing and unhelpful. And to be honest, a significant surprise given the enthusiasm with which the Deputy First Minister and Sinn Féin were promoting the agreement. But now I think we do all need to work together to try and get this sorted, because it would be a huge step backwards if the Stormont House agreement were to be jeopardised, and it would plunge us back potentially into the kind of budget and political crisis with which we were grappling last year.
Mrs Margaret Ritchie.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In associating with the tributes of the House to Lord Molyneux of Killeed, on behalf of my party, I would like to convey condolences to his family and friends and colleagues. But could I also ask the Secretary of State, pursuant to the need to create economic and political stability in Northern Ireland, will she prevail upon the Chancellor to introduce a reduction in VAT on tourism products next week in the budget for the UK, as this will have important, good financial consequences for the tourism industry in Northern Ireland?
Well, I too would like to take this opportunity to associate myself with the comments of the member for Lagan Valley and the Minister on the distinguished record of Lord Molyneux. He was a very distinguished parliamentarian over many years, and he is a sad loss to Northern Ireland. The Chancellor is well aware of the campaign for the tax change the Honourable Lady would like to see. Tax reductions are, of course, difficult. The imperative has to be repairing the public finances, but the Chancellor has moved to relieve tax burdens on business by reducing corporation tax, introducing an employment allowance, and, of course, to support people into work.
Can I associate my party with the comments made about Lord Molyneux in the House today? Economic progress and political stability in Northern Ireland are inextricably linked, as the Secretary of State has said. So does the Secretary of State agree with me that the unravelling of the Stormont House agreement would be an unmitigated disaster for economic and political confidence in Northern Ireland? That now is the time for responsible leadership which accepts the need for a reformed welfare system, which mitigates the impacts of cuts on the most vulnerable, but must be affordable and sustainable?
Secretary of State.
Well, I very much agree with his comments. Now is the time for level-headed consideration of how we get this matter resolved. The reality is that in the autumn in Northern Ireland we were facing a situation where the budget crisis was so serious that the very sustainability and future credibility of the institutions was at stake. We genuinely were looking over a cliff at the possibility of devolution collapsing altogether. It would be a huge step backwards to return us to that. The Stormont House agreement was a big step forward. It is vital that all parties work to ensure that it is implemented fully and fairly.
Ivan Lewis.
Is it the Secretary of State's intention to convene urgent all-party talks in order to find a way forward which would put the welfare reform bill back on track? And can she clarify the deadline date by which the bill must be passed if the executive, not civil servants, are to set next year's budget in Northern Ireland?
Well, as I've already told the House in response to the question from the member for North Belfast, I expect to be meeting with the five-party leaders in the coming days, hopefully tomorrow, depending on when the First and Deputy First Minister get back from New York. It is vital that we see progress on welfare reform. That is a key part of the Stormont Castle Agreement, a key part of the Stormont House Agreement. I will be pressing for that, not least but because without this approach, the Northern Ireland Executive's budget becomes unsustainable, which hugely impairs its ability to function effectively.
Fiona Bruce.
Number 4, Mr Speaker.
Secretary of State.
With permission, Mr Speaker, I'll answer questions 4 and 7 together. The political situation suffered a setback on Monday with a withdrawal of support by Sinn Féin from the Welfare Reform Bill. It's very important the Stormont Agreement is implemented fully and fairly, including all the sections on welfare and budget, and I'll continue to work intensively with the Northern Ireland parties to resolve this impasse.
Fiona Bruce.
Thank the Minister for that reply. What does she consider are the wider political implications of Sinn Féin withdrawing their support for these welfare proposals?
Well, the political implications are very serious. They put in jeopardy corporation tax devolution. They put in jeopardy a financial package of around $2 billion in extra spending power, and they put in jeopardy a fresh approach to the past, which is designed to give better outcomes to victims and survivors. All of that is under threat as a result of what's happened this week, and I will be working hard to do everything I can to retrieve the situation so the Stormont House Agreement goes ahead.
Andrew Rosindale.
Mr. Speaker, will the Secretary of State agree with me that Her Majesty's Government needs to take resolute action against Sinn Féin over the irresponsible and selfish way they are behaving, jeopardising the Stormont Parliament and jeopardising everything that has been achieved in Northern Ireland to date?
Secretary of State.
As I've said, the approach taken by Sinn Féin is hugely disappointing and dramatically different to everything they've been saying over the last few months. I am urging them to change their approach. It is vital that we have a responsible and realistic approach to welfare. The welfare reform package agreed under the Stormont House Agreement is a good one, a generous one and a fair one, and therefore it is vital that it is implemented.
Peter Hain.
Mr. Speaker, can I wish all my friends in Northern Ireland the very best for the future? And can I add that people often take for granted the peace and stability that has been secured in Northern Ireland since the 2007 agreement. But that was only won after conflict, terror and hatred going back centuries through very, very difficult negotiations. It took dedicated, skilled and constant strong leadership by the last Labour government to achieve it. And would she accept that maintaining that progress requires nurturing by this government and also by any governments to follow?
I do accept that, and this government will continue to do all it can to support and nurture that political settlement. And I think that's a message that that all parties need to hear, including Sinn Féin, that we shouldn't take risks with political stability in Northern Ireland, because the consequences could be very grave.
Will the Secretary of State recognise that it's not just Sinn Féin but their lapdogs in the SDLP who have blocked welfare reform in Northern Ireland and put the Assembly in jeopardy? And would she now spell out the consequences for corporation tax, for the economic package and for the long-term sustainability of the budget in Northern Ireland as a result of this irresponsible behaviour?
If this question isn't resolved, if the welfare reform legislation remains permanently stalled, then obviously the rest of the Stormont House Agreement doesn't happen, and that includes the financial package, that includes the devolution of corporation tax. But we are not at that point yet. It is important to work intensively, and in the meantime the UK Government will do everything we can to continue to implement the agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State will be at pains not to feed the sense of impasse that surrounds the Stormont House Agreement. She knows that there were two elements to the understanding on welfare reform. One was the understanding around the amount of money from the Executive's budget that could mitigate measures. The other was the degree of leeway within the welfare spending. Has anything changed in the lines from DWP that have given rise to the allegations now that Sinn Féin are making against the DUP?
I agree with the honourable gentleman that we need to do all we can to keep the situation as calm as possible. And the reality is, unfortunately, these kinds of episodes are characteristic of the implementation process of agreements. I think what is going to be helpful now is for as many facts to be made clear as possible about how the welfare reform programme will operate in Northern Ireland and how the top-ups will operate. It is a generous package, and I think once the details are clear, I hope everyone will be convinced.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. At this, the last Northern Ireland questions before the election, there is an air of some melancholy. Who knows where we will meet again, or on what side of the dispatch box? But in her 3 years as Secretary of State, in which she has been unfailingly courteous, may I ask the Secretary of State, what would she consider to be her proudest, her finest achievement?
Well, up up to Monday, I would have said the Stormont House Agreement, and I continue...
Order! The Honourable Gentleman has asked a question. I want to hear the Secretary of State's answer, and she's entitled for her answer to be heard. The Secretary of State.
Up until Monday, I would have said the Stormont House Agreement, but I think that is still the greatest thing that I've contributed to. It is still on the road. We've had a bump on the road, but the Stormont House Agreement will carry on. And the other thing of which I am proudest is the progress we have made towards devolution of corporation tax. I don't want to see that thrown off course by events which have taken place this week.
Kerry McCarthy.
Question 5, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer questions 5 and 9 together. The Stormont House Agreement identified a clear way forward on parades and flags. The Government will continue to work with the 5 parties in the Executive on implementation of all the provisions of the agreement, including on these issues.
I thank the Secretary of State for that answer, although I must admit I had trouble hearing. Unrest around the parades has an unsettling impact within the community, on local businesses and on tourism. What steps is the Government taking this year to try to ensure a peaceful parade season?
Secretary of State.
Well, I would urge everyone involved in parades or parades-related protests to ensure that all activity in relation to parades and protests is both peaceful and lawful, and that the determinations of the Parades Commissions are complied with as a lawfully constituted authority. I continue to have a series of meetings to try and find a way forward on the parading impasse in North Belfast.
Rosie Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Belfast recently, Ed Miliband said that securing the peace process and a strong economy go hand in hand. Does the Secretary of State agree, and will she support the Heenan-Anderson Commission to ensure people at the margins are not drawn to violence on issues like flags and parades?
Secretary of State.
I agree that politics and economics are intertwined in Northern Ireland. Political stability is crucial for a successful economy. I note the Labour Commission on this, but I think the crucial thing is to stick to the Government's long-term economic plan, because that is delivering economic recovery in Northern Ireland.
Nick Dakey. Oh. Let's hear it.
Does the Secretary of State recognise the feeling of injustice from the unionist community on the whole issue of parades? In my constituency, we have waited 16 years to get a return parade, a church parade. When are we going to get a resolution?
Secretary of State.
I'm very conscious of the concern felt in the community and his constituency. I think the crucial thing is that the Parades Commission determination needs to be abided by, but also it's important to press ahead with a reformed and devolved system of parades adjudication as envisaged by the Stormont House Agreement.
Nick Dakin.
Question number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Minister Murison.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 6 and 10 together. Cutting income tax, freezing fuel duty, welfare reform and dealing with the spectacular deficit we inherited, keeping interest rates low, are practical examples of how this government is helping hard-pressed families in Northern Ireland.
Labour has set out clear plans to raise the national minimum wage to at least £8 by 2020. What is the Minister doing to tackle low pay when 1 in 6 people are in low pay in Northern Ireland?
Minister.
Well, I would have thought he would have started by welcoming the government's efforts to reduce unemployment in Northern Ireland, 17,000 extra jobs in the private sector over the past year alone. If he was listening, he would have got the answer to his question from my right honourable friend earlier on.
Alex Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. NICVA estimates that introducing the living wage would see 173,000 low-paid employees receiving an average gross pay rise of £1,300 a year. Will the government look at strengthening the living wage to help Northern Ireland, which has the lowest private sector pay in the UK?
Minister.
Well, the honourable gentleman, I hope, will have seen the IFSC incomes report published earlier this month, which marked a major milestone, Mr. Speaker, for it is clear now that average incomes in Northern Ireland are back from the pit that they were in prior to Labour's deficit crisis. It is further forecast by that body that incomes will rise above inflation in the year ahead, and I hope you all welcome that.
Ian Paisley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Secretary of State recognise that the Democratic Unionist Party's long-term economic plan of seeing household taxes at their lowest, of freezing the regional rate on household taxes for 5 years, that plan is working? However, the area where this government could have a direct impact on reducing energy costs for both employers and consumers alike, that now is something should address immediately.
Well, the honourable gentleman makes his points in his characteristically formidable fashion, and he will of course welcome the freeze on fuel duty, which will mean that a tank of petrol by the end of this Parliament will be £10 less. I'm sure he will welcome that. He will also welcome inward investment into Northern Ireland, which I know he feels very strongly about, given what has happened in his own constituency. From like Kainos, Randox, White Hart, Revel and PricewaterhouseCoopers, they'll be creating 800 jobs in Northern Ireland, high-quality jobs in the year ahead.
Mr. Speaker, number 8.
I welcome the vote in the Assembly that will allow the full operation of the National Crime Agency in Northern Ireland, ensuring that people there are afforded the same protection from serious and organised crime as the rest of the UK.
Mr. Rutherford.
My right honourable friend, when the NCA is up and running, speak via the Chief Constable to ensure that the NCA looks at the destination of funds from serious and organised crime, because many of the serious and organised criminals who are in the border area giving funds to the IRA are the same people, and it is important those funds don't go to fund political parties.
Well, I'm sure he will understand that I wouldn't comment on individual cases, but I know that the full implementation of NCA in Northern Ireland is a very welcome step. I pay tribute to the Justice Minister and others for securing this result, and I know that they will bear down on all perpetrators of such activities and any who receive the funds that it creates.
Last but not least, Mr. Gregory Campbell.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, will the National Crime Agency specifically target those organised criminal gangs that are working in subterfuge, organised criminal activity in fuel laundering along the border areas in Northern Ireland?
This is it's a significant problem. The House will have the chance to debate it later. There is a significant amount of cross-border cooperation underway because the authorities in HMRC and the police services on both sides of the border are determined to tackle this problem and bring the perpetrators to justice.